The secret experiments of Prometheus in Australia during 9600 BC, and this is concerning ancient Greek texts. Here we owe one clarification, one that the narrative is not linear. The three absolute dictators of Atlantis were once young teenagers and romantics. Then one night they drew lots to share the great problems of life, which always occupied the thinking man who would deal with whom. In Prometheus, it fell to create people from the beginning. In the second, it fell to bring life back to those who lost it, that is, to resurrect the dead. And in the third, it fell to immortality, and you'll find out the names of the other two later. These problems have been solved to some extent. Prometheus gave a solution twice, although his creations were and are far from the man who lives by God. The second gave a partial solution to the zombies in the front line of the Atlantean army. And the third achieved immortality by cloning and transferring the personality to the clone, which they first applied to themselves. Okay, so Prometheus, and then the zombies, and then cloning. Now, the three Levantines clearly exchanged knowledge, and each fully understood the other two. However, their initial quote-unquote targeting of the great pre-eternal problems of man was the one I just wrote about, the author says. They say that during the battle, if you go to hide in a shell crater that just exploded, you are not in danger. It's extremely unlikely that a second shell will land exactly where the previous one fell, they said. Prometheus, therefore, when he left his secret refuge in the desert islands of the Atlantic, went to a crater of a previous shell, literally. Now, Australia, ideal place to start his experiments, isolated and uninhabited and already etheric, a shell crater. And Prometheus was not a frightened little man. He never gave up his plans for world domination along with his two friends. One was killed. It evaporated from the ethereal weapons of the Greeks. Prometheus had learned of the destruction of Atlantis' army, as well as the death of Auduarpa, another immortal, another invulnerable. The second of the group had followed the army as Voss in charge of monsters to control them, one who made them, but he had not calculated, like anyone else, that the Greeks, we're talking about the ancient Greeks here, would have resorted to use of prohibited weapons. Thus, even though he was still using the stored genetic material to resurrect his friend, Prometheus was well aware that the personality of the deceased had been lost forever. And the lucky clone would never again be Auduarpa, his childhood friend. The character had to be transferred to the clone while Auduarpa was alive. The personality of Auduarpa, that is. Parenthesis, if you put the word Auduarpa in the search engines, it will refer you to a band which has dedicated at least one piece of music to it, Ataraxia. You will not find anything for him. My initial information about his existence again was somewhat naive because today some fraternities, quote-unquote, remember him as the Black Chief of Atlantis. And yes, they also remember that he made zombies and monsters. He was not a magician, he was a genetic biologist with very advanced technology. But advanced knowledge often surprises us and is no different from magic, I would say. Australia had and still has another advantage. On its territory is one of the 8, and in fact, land oversized dimensions of our planet. I give the Australian one here among the few. What did Prometheus want now? He needed it to draw etheric energy from the biological laboratory he would set up. And if you're wondering, Atlantis did not fall on such a point, but the biological laboratories of the first research of the old group of 3 drew etheric energy from constellations by simulating the shape. Of course, there is a difference. The, quote, superdimensional points, end quote, draw etheric energy coming out of the Earth itself. But in any case, it does not matter the origin of the ether field, just as it does not matter where you find an outlet to do your job with an electric appliance. There, then, Prometheus applied his discoveries and made people, Exactly. The anthropologists cannot classify as already existing humans the offshoots and races of people. Now, why Australia and how Australia? Because, as Aeschylus tells us, the same thing in Prometheus Bound, the second part of the trilogy still known today, faces of the drama are the ocean, understandably why, the state and the violence. The latter two are the poet's prophecy about the dictatorial powers of Prometheus, who exercised it, but later, due to the universal law, bathes it. The state, in fact, opens the dialogue saying, "We have reached this distant part of Earth," far in relation to Greece, of course, distant from Greece. All excerpts are from Prometheus Bound. Aeschylus even makes Prometheus talk about what teaching, good manners, he did in his creation, among which his morals. However, there is a very important phrase here. Cleondes uk ikuon al oniraton oliiki morphasi ton macron vion. Well, the only ones who talked about the never-before dream season are the Aborigines. How much more should the poet's desert say in order to understand who he means? It's exactly the reason why various sects today sacrifice roosters, which roosters symbolize the spiritual awakening. They want to go back to the bliss of the dream age, quote unquote, where they had no consciousness, therefore no conscious problems of choosing good and evil, that is, being irresponsible, but also in an animal state. But what stands out for anyone who has, of course, is the Aeschylus description of Prometheus's place of punishment. Erimu aetondos pagu. Desert around adjacent ice. Ice from pygmy. The words fall head over heels into the meaning. We talk about the Uluru, the Uluru Mount of in the language of the Aborigines, the Rock of Ire, otherwise known as Uluru in the language of the Aborigines. This was exactly the place of Prometheus's punishment, and not the Caspian Caucasus Mountains, although his punishment came later, not when he was creating the Aborigines. We'll see when and how. Today, Uluru is a place of pilgrimage for the natives, although it is at least 1,500 kilometers in a straight line from the two-dimensional point of the biological laboratory. They honor the place of punishment of their creator very simply. I'll explain to you, however, the word ice, quote unquote, because you must have wondered, as far as ice, who dug this rock into the ground? Well, let me tell you another secret, the author says. About 3 million years ago, and a little bit, when Phaethon exploded, some parts of it fell to Earth. They crossed the space between the two planets, plowed into the Earth's atmosphere, glowed into the Earth's atmosphere, and were nailed to the ground, some several tens of meters deep. One of them is Uluru, who literally means penetrated the Earth. If we look at the map, we will see that they formed about a geodetic imaginary straight line on Earth, like a slap from the space tsunami that erupted on our planet. Another point is the Kaaba of Mecca, the remains of a meteorite which is worshipped by Muslims, another in Jerusalem, some more in the island of Tinos in the Aegean Sea, another in Athens, and near the Acropolis. You should make the connection of the Holy Sepulchre in Holy Solima with the PT north of the Acropolis, not below the Acropolis, not the underground Parthenon and the rest, nor where the synagogues are. Elsewhere, understandably, though I will not tell you in public, he said. It is for these parts of the dying planet, for the domination of the lands above them, that war was waged, and war parallel to the wages of geopolitical reason. Now, Prometheus, then, with the technique of the superdimensional point, quote unquote, remembered what he had done to Phaethon, because he was one of those who found the secret of immortality there as well. How do I know the latter? Simply because in his current incarnation he remembers. And who do I know? How do I know he remembers? Because he has given a public speech where indirectly but very clearly he shows that his memory works fine, I'll not nail him in public because a tormented soul has a right to repentance and peace. Now, the created people. Several years ago, we had the mad cow disease, officially spongiform encephalopathy, broke out, where various cunning speculators fed cows food with animal remains against the nature of the animal, resulting in the cow literally going crazy. The same, of course, had once been done by the king of Thrace, Diomedes, on his horses, according to the Iliad. Yes, we can't have carnivorous animals. In other words, carnivorous animals can't have carnivorous animals. In other words, we can't have cats or dogs or lions for our diets because that would create problems for our health. Now, at the same time, a documentary was shown on one of the domestic TV channels, which clearly showed that some women suffered from this disease, because of their practices. Now, though in fact women and children are more at risk because they eat what happens when you have entrails of corpses. Now, Australian government by law, 1955 banned these practices, but the law cannot stop what's happening in Zula. Now, we are interested in the IQ. Prometheus, the sample that Prometheus thought a good biological engineer who sets goals, their food self-sufficiency, proteins, and whatever. I support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box. Proof 2 that from the beginning he intended to design war clones, which war clones now also have remarkable telepathic abilities. So on the battlefield, they form an autonomous and mostly, or rather, unaffected network. Once upon a time, in another dramatized documentary about the first days of spaceflight, again on a domestic channel, the following amazing things shown: to install large satellite dish in the Australian desert, so they fall for something. Who are they? What are they going to do? The techniques are somewhat simplistic. Listening to a metal or bird or flying high. Now, we asked them again if the bird needs to be heard in order to fly, and scientists said the bird flies by itself, but sometimes it falls below without wanting to, so they must hear if it is in danger. So, now indeed the terrestrial gravitational field has some anomalies in some areas, which are probably due to the contribution of the terrestrial etheric field. These are still sought after by technicians, but they have not found an answer. Military research on the orbits of intercontinental ballistic missiles. Now, there are some natives that said absolutely nothing. They lit fires and waited. At one point, technicians hearing spaceship signal shouted, "Here it is," and it started falling again. At that moment, people began to murmur all together, and their shaman rose and lit the fire, which sparked high. Then the pilot of the spaceship was heard talking to the antenna technicians, almost frightened. "Dude, what are these sparks around the spaceship? Do not worry, however, we have regained height." Honestly, I don't know what to say here, but I do not question the sincerity of this story at all. Now, telepathic and easygoing, something was wrong. The natives were not in the mood for war, and obviously Prometheus's orders were written majestically where the ink does not write. Hence, the experiment of creating an army of clones had to be repeated elsewhere, and a little different maybe. Prometheus left Australia and moved to other places, presumably closer to ancient Greece. Postscript: do not ask me where Aeschylus knew Australia. I will answer you where Diogenes the Cynic knew America. See the dialogue between Diogenes and Alexander the Great, ancient knowledge of the morphology of our planet, which had been preserved by the priesthood. Postscript second, the scientific explanation of the origin of the neighbor, ULURUs. Are you sitting well? Tie yourself up and do not smoke. All of Australia was once scarlet, he said. But erosion from rain and wind eroded all of Australia, he said, leaving scarlet alone. Unfortunately, I could not find the foreign website again with these diamonds of data. But it's not to scream with something like that. Is it cool to sit? Postscript third, and we end. Prometheus, somewhere in verse 201 of Demotis, and henceforth implicitly admits that he is faithful to Saturn and not to Zeus, with whom he has a dispute. The article is a continuation of use of ethereal superships in 9600 BC. And this is from Revelation of the Ninth Wave by Stefan Keller from, this is on a Greek article I've translated for you. Please leave your comments about this, and thank you for your support.